The galaxy had made one huge mistake about Earth. Because humans came in clean suits, spoke in calm voices, traded in art and poetry, and smiled when they met strangers, most alien species came to the same conclusion. They thought humanity was soft. Intelligent, yes. Useful, yes. Civilized, definitely. But still soft. They saw empathy and called it weakness. They saw patience and called it fear. They saw diplomacy and assumed it was all humans had. They were wrong. Very, very wrong. That truth came crashing into the open on Cycle 44 of the Standard Galactic Year, inside the heart of the Pan-Galactic Council, when a mercenary army kicked down the doors of the assembly chamber and tried to take the station hostage. They thought they were walking into a room full of prey. Instead, they woke up something ancient, something buried deep inside the human body, something old enough to come from a death world. The Pangalactic Assembly Chamber on Station Onyx had been built to keep peace between more than 40 spacefaring species. Everything about it was neutral by design. The lighting was a soft violet, gentle on the eyes of most races. Gravity sat at a carefully measured middle point, so no species felt too heavy or too light. The air was filtered every second to remove any scent or chemical trace that might trigger fear, aggression, or territorial instincts. White polished stone curved in smooth lines around the chamber. Long hanging gardens dropped from the upper balconies. Water flowed through clear channels along the walls. The whole room looked less like a political center and more like a temple built for calm. And for the last 5 years, humans had used places like this to build a very specific image. Harmless, rational, cooperative. Ambassador Ramirez Graham sat at the Terran delegation desk with perfect posture, fingers resting lightly over a glowing datapad. He was 52, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and carried himself with the easy calm of a man who had survived decades of negotiation without ever needing to raise his voice. He wore a charcoal suit, not armor, not a pressure shell, not a ceremonial robe packed with hidden systems like half the delegates in the room. Just a suit that IT was old-fashioned by galactic standards, and that was exactly the point. Earth wanted to look orderly, civilized. Controlled T.O. Ramirez's right sat Captain Suddy Jenkins, Earth's military attaché. She wore a formal dark dress uniform with polished insignia and no visible weapon. To everyone else in the chamber, she looked ceremonial, decorative even. Behind them, typing updates into a terminal with nervous focus, was Arthur Pendleton, a young diplomatic intern fresh out of Earth's academic system. He was brilliant, pale, slightly awkward, and so new to real galactic politics that he still looked surprised every time someone important spoke directly to him. To the rest of the room. The three humans looked fragile, in heavy exoskeleton, in venom sacs, in armored hide, in visible natural weapons, just skin, cloth, and polite expressions. High Counselor Various watched them from the central podium with mild approval. He was of the Kalan race, tall and avian, covered in layered dark feathers, with a hooked beak and golden eyes that missed very little. He liked humans. They were useful trading partners, good with food systems, logistics, long-range shipping, and impossible paperwork. They negotiated constantly, always looking for balance, always willing to give a little to preserve peace. In the Council's internal assessments, humanity had quietly been placed in a category most species never said out loud. High-functioning prey. They moved in groups. They reassured each other constantly. They talked through conflict instead of rushing to violence. They tried to calm aggressive species rather than challenge them. The Council. All of that pointed to one thing, that a hunted past. Various tilted his head and clicked his beak, letting the universal translator carry his words across the chamber. The Council acknowledges Earth's proposal regarding the Archon trade route. However, the tax structure still favors the inner rim. We request a further 3% concession to support the outer colonies. Ramirez smiled, warm and measured. High Counselor, Earth understands the pressure the outer colonies are under. But we are already absorbing the transit fuel costs. We can concede 1.5%, provided the Council fleet guarantees protection across the shipping lanes. Various gave a faint rustle of amusement. Always flexible. Always calm. Always reasonable. Acceptable. he said. "We will log the amendment." Arthur quickly entered the revised figures, fingers flying over the glass interface. In his haste, he knocked his stylus off the desk. It clattered loudly onto the stone floor. Arthur winced and bent down at once. Saw the massive brute-class delegate sitting behind him barely reacted to that alien. The young human looked like he might snap in half if the room pressure changed too fast. "Good work, Arthur," Ramirez said quietly without looking back. "Keep Geneva on the line. They'll want the updated numbers the second this is signed." "Yes, sir," Arthur said, cheeks still red as he resumed typing. Captain Jenkins leaned slightly toward Ramirez. "Sir," she said in a low voice, "perimeter grid is showing unusual fluctuation." "Sector 4. Ramirez did not move, and his expression did not change. "Council security?" No response. "Cause? Could be telemetry interference," Jenkins said. "Could be a flare, but the backup network is going dark one layer at a time." That made Ramirez glance up for half a second toward the domed ceiling above the chamber, where the distant colors of a nebula glowed through the transparent shielded glass. "Keep watching it," he said. "No panic over a technical fault." Jenkins gave a small nod, but her eyes stayed sharp. The problem was simple. Everyone in the room trusted the rules. The council had enjoyed peace for too long. Too many treaties. Too many successful compromises. Too many years of believing civilization had finally outgrown raw violence that made them slow, and the people coming through the doors were not slow. A deep hum rolled through the floor, not the normal vibration of station systems. This was harsher, uneven. "Building." Various stopped, speaking mid-sentence. His head snapped to the far end of the chamber. Ramirez rose halfway from his seat. Then the reinforced durasteel doors at the back of the rotunda bent inward. The sound that followed was not fire. It was force. The blast hit like a giant invisible hammer. The doors tore apart in a storm of steel and pressure. White stone shattered. Hydroponic glass burst into the air. Water sprayed from broken irrigation lines. Fragments of metal screamed through the chamber. Delegates yelled. Some dropped flat. Others ran before they even understood what had happened. Ramirez was thrown backward into the Terran desk. Jenkins moved instantly. She grabbed Arthur by the collar and yanked him down behind the thick stone barrier of their station, just as another wave of debris ripped through the room. When the smoke began to clear, figures stepped through it, heavy, armored, armed. The Valari Syndicate, pirates, slavers, vagunks, outcasts from a dozen brutal species, welded together into a mercenary force feared across the outer systems. At their head came Commander Rex. He was enormous, a reptilian biped in scarred-powered armor, broad enough to block half the ruined doorway by himself. In his main hands, he carried a high-yield plasma rotary cannon. In a pair of smaller secondary arms, he held two jagged trench blades stained by old battles. Behind him poured more shock troops, moving in disciplined formation through smoke and broken glass like they had done this many times before. "Nobody moves," Rex roared through his suit speakers. His voice hit the chamber like thunder. 3 council guards charged down the main aisle with shock pikes raised. Rex did not even break stride. He lifted the cannon and fired. Blue plasma flashed, so bright it hurt to look at. The guards vanished before they made it halfway, leaving only scorched black marks across the polished floor. That was when panic truly exploded. Delegates screamed and crawled under desks. Some trampled each other, trying to run. Others froze in place, their bodies locking under fear. "Seal the chamber," Rex barked. Valari troops slapped heavy jammers onto the ruined door frames. Systems died at once. Emergency shutters slammed over the skylight. The chamber darkened into deep amber light. Rex paced down the center aisle like he owned the room. "I am Commander Rex of the Valari Syndicate. This station is under our control. You are hostages. Any species that moves without my permission will be executed. Any species that speaks without my permission will be executed. Your governments are now receiving our demands." Behind the Terran desk, Ramirez checked his side with one hand. Pain flashed across his face for half a second, then vanished. Jenkins was already counting. 36 hostiles, she whispered. Heavy armor. Plasma weapons. Kinetic shields. We have nothing, Arthur breathed. Jenkins did not answer. A large insectoid Valari soldier began dragging delegates out from cover and forcing them into the middle of the chamber. One by one, terrified officials were shoved to their knees. Then it reached the Terran desk. Up! The creature hissed through its translator, pointing a scatter rifle at Ramirez. Ramirez rose slowly with both hands visible. "We are unarmed," he said in a calm, even tone. "We will comply. There is no reason for violence." He stepped out first, then Jenkins. Arthur followed last, trying to breathe, trying not to shake, trying very hard not to look at the bodies burned into the floor. IT almost worked. Then his foot caught the shattered edge of the desk. He stumbled forward and slammed into the insectoid soldier. The alien snarled and swung the butt of the rifle. The strike caught Arthur in the face and threw him hard onto the stone. His glasses shattered. Blood spilled instantly from a cut along his forehead. "Arthur!" Ramirez stepped forward. "Hold!" came Rex's voice. The entire room went still. Commander Rex turned and walked toward the humans, each step loud against the broken stone. He looked down at Arthur, then up at Ramirez, taking in the tailored suit, the calm face, the open hands that a cruel smile spread across his reptilian mouth. "Soft species," he said. "Weak, fleshy, easy to break." "He is a non-combatant," Ramirez said. "He's an intern. I am Ambassador Ramirez Graham, Senior Representative for Earth. Take me as your primary hostage. Let the boy receive medical treatment." Rex laughed at a deep, ugly sound. "You do not make terms, human. I make examples." He bent down, grabbed Arthur by the hair, and lifted him off the floor. Arthur screamed. Blood ran down his face and dripped over Rex's armored wrist. His legs kicked wildly, uselessly. "Please," Arthur cried. "Please, I don't know anything." "Let him go," Ramirez said. Something in his voice had changed. Not louder, not more emotional, just colder. Rex seemed to enjoy that. He drew a plasma pistol with one of his smaller hands and pressed the glowing barrel against Arthur's temple. The heat touched skin. Arthur screamed again, a high, raw sound that echoed through the chamber and cut through every other noise in the room. The room expected Ramirez to beg now. Various expected it too. Every alien instinct in the chamber said this was the moment. The human diplomat would break, that he would plead, offer anything, fold under pressure, show what prey did when a predator held one of its own. But Ramirez did not plead. He did not look away. He stared directly at Rex. And in that instant, something disappeared from his face. The diplomat was gone. Humanity had evolved on a world where survival was ugly. Not because humans were the strongest. They were not. Not because they were the fastest. They were not. Not because they had claws, fangs, armor, poison, or natural weapons. They did not. They survived because they endured. They cooperated. They tracked. They hunted longer than other things could run. And when something threatened the group, they became violent in a way that was brutally efficient. Civilization had covered all of that in laws, habits, smiles, and tailored fabric. But the old machine was still inside the body, still waiting. Arthur screamed again, and the switch flipped. Various saw it happen in real time. Ramirez's posture lowered by a few inches. His shoulders squared. The relaxed openness vanished. His weight shifted forward with subtle balance, like a body preparing for impact. His pupils widened. His focus narrowed until there was nothing in the universe except the target in front of him. The blood drained from his face as his body moved resources where they were needed most. Hands, legs, core, speed. Force that he did not look angry. That was the part that terrified Various most. There was no shouting, and no rage, and no warning. Just silence, that a predator's silence. Captain Jenkins had changed too. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes went flat and steady. Across the chamber, Sergeant Thomas Hayes, another human attaché who had been forced to his knees near the side exit, lifted his head and met Jenkins' eyes for less than a second. And words passed between them. None were needed. Rex pressed the plasma pistol harder. Against Arthur's head. "Watch him die, human." Ramirez moved. Ramirez moved, that he did not run, that he exploded forward. One moment, he was standing still with blood on his face and his hands raised in surrender. The next, he crossed the distance between himself and Rex so fast that several delegates did not even understand what they had seen. There were nearly 10 feet between them. For a man in a torn diplomatic suit, with cracked ribs and no armor, that distance should have mattered. It did not. Rex had barely enough time to widen his eyes before Ramirez was already inside his reach. Ramirez did not strike the armored. He did not waste 1 second hitting metal. His right hand came up hard and sharp, driving straight into the soft sensory cluster beneath Rex's lower jaw. It was not a wild blow. It was precise, focused, brutal. The impact burst fragile tissue under the reptilian warlord's faceplate. Rex roared. The sound shook the chamber. Arthur slipped from his grip and crashed back to the floor, coughing and gasping at the same time. Ramirez's left hand shot up and clamped around the barrel of the plasma pistol, still glowing from the heat pressed against Arthur's skin. The metal burned through his palm instantly, skin charred. The smell hit the air at once. But Ramirez did not let go. He did not even flinch. He twisted with all the force in his body, wrenching the weapon upward and sideways. Rex's smaller wrist bent the wrong way, with a wet cracking sound that made half the chamber recoil in horror. The pistol tore free. Arthur hit the floor hard, alive, and Captain Jenkins was already moving. She launched off the shattered Terran desk in one smooth, violent motion, using the broken stone as a platform. She did not go for Rex. She used his huge armored body for momentum, planting both boots against his chest plate and kicking off like a diver pushing away from a wall. The move sent her flying sideways across the chamber, straight into the insectoid Valari soldier who had struck Arthur. The alien barely had time to turn. Jenkins crashed into its shoulder first, wrapped one arm around its upper neck, and drove both of them to the stone floor. Before it could bring its rifle around, she slammed her knee into the thin joints of its front limbs. Once, twice, 3 times. The limbs bent backward with snapping sounds. The creature shrieked. She tore the scatter rifle from its grip, reversed it in her hands, and smashed the stock down across the alien's mandibles. Chitin cracked. The shrieking stopped. Back in the center of the room, Rex staggered in blind pain, one sensory cluster ruined. One smaller arm hanging broken, blood streaming down the front of his armor. He swung wildly with a massive primary arm. The blow caught Ramirez across the side of the body and sent him flying through the air. He smashed into a white stone pillar so hard that the sound echoed. Several alien delegates gasped at once. That should have ended it. That kind of hit would have folded most species in half. Ramirez collapsed to one knee. Blood spilled from his mouth. His burned hand was already blackening. For one terrible second, the chamber thought the fight was over. Then he stood back up. Not slowly, not shaking, just up as if the body had not been given permission to stop. Blood ran from his nose and down over his lips. His suit was torn. One side of his chest rose unevenly with every breath, but his eyes never left Rex. That was the first moment real fear appeared on the faces of the Valari, because Prey did not do that. Prey broke. Prey begged. Prey stayed down after taking a hit like that. Ramirez simply wiped blood from his shin and stepped forward again. Rex felt it then. Not pain. Not anger. Feared a cold reptilian dread spreading under his armor. Kill them, he roared to his troops. Kill all of them. But another human had already started. Sergeant Thomas Hayes moved from the left side of the chamber with quiet speed, had been forced to his knees near the outer row of delegation desks, watched by a Valari guard who had turned toward the fight for 1 second too long. That 1 second was enough. Hayes swept the alien's legs out from under it and caught the body as it fell so it would not hit the ground too loud. From his breast pocket, he pulled what looked, for a ridiculous moment, like nothing more than a polished metal pen. Then he drove it straight into the unarmored slit at the base of the soldier's neck seal. The alien died before it could make sound. Hayes ripped the plasma rifle free, dropped to one knee behind a broken desk for stability, and fired .3 sharp shots, not wild. Not rush .3 separate, calm, centered shots, .3 Valari troops, dropped with holes through the center of their visors. And just like that, The room changed. This was no longer a hostage situation. This was a hunt gone wrong. The Valari had entered the chamber believing they were the strongest beings inside it. Now they were trapped in a sealed room with 3 humans who did not seem to care about pain, did not freeze under pressure, and did not waste movement. Rex snarled and brought up his heavy rotary cannon. The spinning barrel turned toward Ramirez. "Die, you soft freak." But before the weapon could fire, Jenkins slid across the blood-slick floor near Rex's feet. One of his jagged trench blades had fallen from his broken secondary arm during the first clash. She grabbed it in one motion. She rose to a knee and hurled it. The blade spun hard through the air and buried itself in the exposed cable cluster connecting Rex's cannon to the weapon pack on his back. The cannon sparked, coughed, died. Rex pulled the trigger anyway. Nothing happened. Ramirez was already on him. He ducked under the reptilian warlord's desperate swing, stepped inside the range of his armor, and drove his knee straight into the side joint of Rex's reverse-bending leg. The joint broke. Rex crashed downward with a scream. Ramirez seized the heavy chain of office hanging across the warlord's chest, yanked his head down, and drove his own knee into the already shattered sensory cluster beneath Rex's face. The crack that followed silenced the room. Rex collapsed face first onto the white stone. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The surviving Valari froze. The delegates stared. Captain Jenkins stood over the wrecked insectoid soldier, chest rising and falling, uniform torn and dark with blood. Haze covered the chamber with the captured rifle, steady and precise. Ramirez stood above the fallen warlord with blood on his face, one hand ruined, one side of his body bruised and broken. It should have looked impossible. Instead, it looked final point one by one. The remaining mercenaries began lowering their weapons. Not because anyone ordered them to, because terror had reached them. Real terror, the kind they usually inflicted on others. High Counselor Various slowly lifted himself from behind the podium, unable to fully understand what he had just witnessed. The most feared warlord in the outer systems lay unconscious on the council floor. And the man who put him there was the same human who had, less than an hour earlier, spent 3 full hours discussing freight taxes and shipping guarantees with calm professional patience. Ramirez looked down. Arthur was still on the floor, breathing hard, shaking, blood running down one side of his face. The dead stillness in Ramirez's eyes began, slowly, to fade. His pupils shrank, his shoulders loosened by a fraction. The thing beneath the surface was still there, but it was receding. He bent down and offered Arthur his burned hand. The skin was blistered, ruined, black at the center, and still he offered it gently. "It's all right, Arthur," Ramirez said, voice rough from pain but soft again. "You're safe." Arthur stared at him for one stunned second, then took the hand and let the ambassador pull him up. Around them, alien delegates stayed exactly where they were, afraid to speak, afraid to move, afraid even to breathe too loudly. Ramirez turned toward High Counselor Various. The avian diplomat flinched without meaning to. That hurt more than he expected, because in that reflex, Various understood something terrible. He had never truly known what humans were. Ramirez straightened what was left of his tie. Blood had soaked the front of his shirt. One sleeve was half burned away. His face was smeared red. Even so, some piece of the old diplomat returned to his expression. "My apologies for the disruption, Counselor," he said. The words were so polite they almost sounded unreal. "Perhaps we should call a brief recess." Various opened his beak. An "oh" sound came out. For a full minute, the only noises in the chamber were the dripping water from the broken gardens, the wet breathing of wounded mercenaries, and the faint hum of Hayes's captured rifle as he kept it trained on the kneeling Valari. Then another sound cut through the silence, a burst of static point. One of the disabled comm systems sparked back to life. A harsh synthetic voice tore across the chamber through the damaged speakers. "This is Subcommander Vox of the Valari Syndicate. Commander Rex's biometrics have flatlined. Do not celebrate. We control the station's primary fusion reactor in Sector 7. We control the orbital defense batteries. Release our commander and surrender the human delegation immediately, or we will vent life support across the entire station. You have 1 standard hour." The message ended with a hiss. For half a second, nobody moved. Then panic surged through the room all over again. Delegates began shouting over one another. Several dropped into open fear. One Zaire official started clicking his armored plates so fast it sounded like rain. Another delegate began praying aloud in a language the translator could not keep up with. "Quiet," Jenkins snapped. She did not shout. She did not need to. The room silenced instantly. Every eye turned to her. Jenkins looked at Ramirez. "Localized jammers are still blocking long-range response. We can't reach the fleet." Ramirez lowered himself carefully against the side of the ruined desk, breath tightening from the damage in his ribs. "How many hostiles did the first scan show before the systems died?" "About 200 on station," Jenkins said. She was already stripping gear from dead Valari bodies as she spoke, removing shield belts, checking charge levels, taking anything useful. "If Vox holds the reactor, he'll have 30 to 40 guarding the choke points. Maybe more. He'll do it." Arthur asked, voice thin. Jenkins glanced at him once. "Yes." Hayes checked the remaining power in his rifle. "Then we take the reactor back." Various stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot be serious." Sector 7 is fortified. Heavy weapons. Narrow approach lines. You are 3 injured bipeds with scavenged equipment. That is not a rescue operation. That is suicide. "The fleet is 3 days out," Ramirez said quietly. He looked up at the avian counselor with blood still drying on his face. "In 1 hour, there won't be any air left to wait with." Various tried to answer, but Arthur spoke first. "They're right." The young intern was still shaking, but something had changed in his voice. Fear was there, yes, but mixed with it now was something darker, something steadier. Jenkins stepped away from the bodies and moved to the ruined hydroponic garden where black soil and water had mixed in a thick, dark mud across the floor. Without explanation, she knelt and dragged both hands through it. Then she smeared the mud across her face, across her neck, over the bright insignia on what remained of her uniform. Hayes did the same, dulling every reflective surface on his body, and nearby delegates stared in confusion. "What are they doing?" Arthur swallowed and answered without looking away from the humans. "Camouflage." He pressed a bloodied hand against his forehead and gave a shaky breath. "They're getting ready to hunt." Ramirez slowly pushed himself upright, every movement controlled through pain, but he looked at Jenkins, T. Hayes, T. Arthur. Then at the chamber full of alien leaders who had spent years seeing humanity as useful, intelligent, and soft. "No one leaves this room," he said. "No one touches the prisoners. Counselor Various, keep the delegates calm. Arthur, stay alive." Arthur nodded at once. Ramirez held out the captured plasma pistol Jenkins had recovered from Rex. She handed it to him grip first. He checked the charge, then tucked it into the ruined side of his jacket like it belonged there. The warm smile was gone again. Not replaced by rage, replaced by purpose. "The Valari came here thinking they were the monsters in the dark," he said. He looked toward the ruined entrance. "They're about to learn the difference." The Valari had one great weakness. They believed fear only worked in one direction. They knew how to cause it. They knew how to use it. They knew how to break weaker species with it. But they did not know how to survive it when turned back on them. Subcommander Vox stood above the primary fusion reactor in Sector 7, staring over a fortress he believed could not be breached. He had 30 hardened shock troops positioned across every approach line. Heavy barricades sealed the main corridors. Automated plasma turrets covered the central entrances. Motion scanners swept the maintenance lanes. Thermal optics watched the support shafts. From his position, everything looked secure. That was because he was thinking like a soldier. The humans were not coming in like soldiers. They were coming in like predators 0.5 levels above the reactor sector. Captain Suddy Jenkins and Sergeant Thomas Hayes stood before a maintenance access hatch hidden behind a coolant control panel. The passage beyond was not meant for full-size biological life. It was narrow, freezing loud, and packed with pipes, cables, and structural supports. Perfect. Hayes forced the hatch open with a scavenge pry bar, and a blast of frozen air hit them in the face. Jenkins looked down into the shaft. Far below, metal crossbeams disappeared into dark layers of machinery and vapor. "No clean path," Hayes whispered. "Good." Jenkins replied. Behind them, on a flickering emergency screen patched through from the assembly chamber, Arthur's shaky voice crackled over a local line. You're 3 levels above the reactor ring now. Main corridors are sealed. If you keep descending through coolant infrastructure, you can bypass the choke points. Any live cameras? Jenkins asked. Some. Most are corrupted. I can give you motion pings, but the feed is dirty. Dirty is enough. In the assembly chamber, Arthur sat at the Terran terminal with dried blood on his face and a strip of torn uniform wrapped around his forehead. His fingers moved fast now, not because he had stopped being afraid, because there was no room left for panic. Every surviving delegate in the room watched him work. They had stopped seeing him as the young intern who dropped a stylus. Now, they saw a human under pressure, still injured, still scared, still functioning. Behind Arthur, Ambassador Ramirez leaned against the shattered Terran desk, while a salvaged medkit lay open beside him. High Counselor Various stood a cautious distance away, still not fully trusting himself to get too close to the injured human diplomat. Ramirez kept one hand pressed against his ribs while he studied the half-dead security map on Arthur's screen. They'll expect corridor entry, Ramirez said. They'll get silence instead, Arthur answered. Various turned sharply toward him. How can you speak so calmly? Arthur paused for only a second. Because if I stop, they die. That answer left the chamber quiet again. Inside the shaft, Jenkins and Hayes began their descent. They moved without wasted motion, one after the other, using crossbeams, pipe housings, and maintenance braces with practice control. Humans had not evolved for flight, but they had evolved from bodies built to climb, grab, balance, pull, and descend through dangerous terrain. Their species remembered vertical movement. Their muscles remembered it even when the mind was busy. The shaft roared with machine wind. Frost coated the metal. Every surface was cold enough to burn skin. But both humans kept moving, dark with mud, outlines broken, bodies blending into the machinery. 2 levels below, a pair of Valari guards stood outside a service pressure door leading into the reactor perimeter. They were relaxed. That was their second mistake. The first was underestimating humans. The second was believing the danger would come from in front of them. 1 guard checked a thermal scanner and gave a low reptilian grunt. Nothing in the corridor. The prey is hiding, the other said. Let them. They will beg when the air starts to thin. High above them, hidden in the dark framework of the shaft, Jenkins and Hayes exchanged a quick look. Then they started working. Humans do something many alien species find disturbing. They sweat in the freezing cold of the shaft, while keeping constant low-level effort in their movements. Jenkins and Hayes let their bodies cool from the outside. Moisture evaporated from their skin and clothing. Their surface temperature dropped fast. Homo species. It would have felt miserable. The thermal scanner below. It looked like background metal and pipe frost. The guards never noticed. Jenkins shifted upside down beneath a beam, locking one leg around the support with frightening control. In her right hand, she held a Durasteel wrench taken from a maintenance locker. Hayes steadied himself on the opposite side. Plasma rifle angled downward through the dark. He raised 3 fingers. 2.1. Jenkins let go. She dropped in total silence. 15 feet. No scream. No warning. No wasted movement. The exact moment she fell past the first guard, she swung the wrench with both hands. The heavy metal crashed into the base of the alien's neck seal with all the force of gravity behind it. The guard collapsed instantly. Before the second could even turn, Hayes fired once from above. The shot punched through the side of its cranial plate. The body folded where it stood. Jenkins landed in a crouch, rolled, rose, and dragged both bodies into shadow before they could be seen from. The next angle. No alarm and shouting. Just 2 dead sentries and a door now standing open. Back in the assembly chamber, the delegates watched the patch security feed in stunned silence. The camera angle was poor, half-broken, and missing audio, but what it showed was enough that a shadow dropped at a strike, that a body falling before it understood it had been hit. Then darkness again. Various stared at the screen. They did not engage. They erased them. Arthur did not look away from the terminal. Humans don't always need a battlefield, he said quietly. Sometimes a tight space is better. The words settled heavily over the room. Down in the lower levels, Vox's confidence had not yet broken. He paced before the reactor's central control hub while technicians monitored shield status and station systems. Any movement from the council guards? Scattered resistance, Commander. Any sign of fleet response? None. Then they are contained. Vox said he believed that. For another 6 minutes. Then one of the biometric panels on his tactical display blinked out. A single red light disappeared from the outer ring. Vox frowned. Status on gate 2 sentries? No answer. A second light vanished. Then a third. Not in a cluster. Not from explosion point one at a time. A pattern began forming around the perimeter like something invisible was chewing pieces off the edge. Vox leaned closer to the display. Report. Only static answered. B. Why then Jenkins and Hayes were already deeper inside Sector 7. They did not take the central service lane. They moved through crawl ducts, subfloor cable trenches, coolant relays, and maintenance recesses. Every part of the station meant for drones or repair systems became a road to them. The Valari had fortified entrances. Humans were ignoring entrances at T1 point. Jenkins paused beside a narrow support vent and held up a fist. Hayes froze. Ahead, through a grated opening, for Valari troops moved down a side corridor in staggered formation. Heavy armor, full rifles, comms active. They were looking forward, watching for an attack from the reactor direction. Not above, not behind. Hayes signed. Take rear. Jenkins nodded once. The corridor lights flickered under emergency power. A shadow shifted across the ceiling pipework. The rear mercenary slowed. Looked back. Too late. Hayes dropped down behind him, one hand clamping over the vocal speaker at the base of the helmet, while a scavenge blade slid cleanly into the seam under the arm joint. The alien jerked once and went limp. The same moment, Jenkins moved from the side recess like she had been built from the dark itself. She struck the second soldier low, slamming the Durasteel wrench into the side of the knee joint. Armor held. The joint under it did not. As the alien dropped, she drove the broken end of a metal conduit through the gap beneath the jaw plate. The third soldier turned and fired wildly. Blue plasma ripped through empty air. Hayes rolled behind a bulkhead and fired once from the ground. The bolt went through the trooper's visor. The fourth tried to shout into comms. Jenkins reached him first. She did not stab. She grabbed his own rifle, turned it inward, and slammed the muzzle under his shin before pulling the trigger with his hand still on it. The corridor went quiet again. 0.4 more bodies, 0.4 more disappearing lights on Vox's display. This time, the sub-commander felt cold. What is happening out there? He snapped. One of his technicians swallowed hard. Outer patrol response is failing. Failing how? They are going silent. That answer made every surviving Valari in the room shift a little. Silent deaths were not how hostages fought. Silent deaths were how hunters worked. Back in the assembly chamber, the delegates now watched the feed the way prey animals watch a storm approach. And no one pretended anymore that humans were weak. The question had changed. Now they wanted to know how much had been hidden from them. That a Zyre delegate clicked his armored plates nervously. This is military conditioning. Arthur shook his head. No, he said. This is older than that. Various turned to him. Explain. Arthur swallowed, eyes fixed on a monitor. Before humans had advanced weapons, before we had engines, steel, or cities, we lived among animals stronger than us. Faster too. So we learned a different way to win. We tracked. We waited. We followed. We hit when the target was tired, confused, alone, or facing the wrong direction. On the screen, another corridor came alive for a second. A Valari patrol scanned ahead through drifting vapor. Then one soldier at the back simply vanished upward into a dark maintenance gap. The other spun around too late. Gunfire flashed. A body dropped. Then another. Then the feed cut again. Arthur continued, voice low. We don't need to be bigger than the thing we're hunting. We just need to stay dangerous longer. Various felt his feathers tighten against his body. Psychological pressure had started working now. Vox could feel it spreading through his men. Orders had to be repeated. Weapon grips were tightening. Breathing rates were up. Formation discipline was slipping. He changed strategy at once. Group up, he barked. All remaining units fall back to the reactor chamber. No one patrols alone. Overlapping fire zones. No one breaks line. The surviving mercenaries obeyed. That made sense to them that IT was the smart move. Pull inward. Defend the objective. Create a kill box. On paper, it was solid. In practice, it meant the humans had already won half the battle. Because now the Valari were no longer hunting intruders. They were hiding together. Jenkins and Hayes reached a sublevel overlook above the reactor chamber and studied the room through a broken vent grill. The primary fusion reactor rose from the center of the chamber like a tower of light and heat, ringed by catwalks, coolant towers, power conduits, and armored control stations below. The surviving Valari had formed a tight defensive circle around the central console. Heavy weapons outward, backs close, eyes searching everywhere at once. Vox stood near the core controls, shouting orders louder than necessary. Hayes watched for a few seconds, then whispered, "They're burning energy." Jenkins nodded. "Panic is setting in. 15 left. Maybe less. Enough." Hayes looked down at the chamber, then toward the thick conduit systems running under the floor and up through the walls. "We can hit environment." "We will." They withdrew from the vent and crawled into the support line above the reactor room. Step by step, the station itself became a weapon. Hayes cut into a maintenance relay and disabled selected gravity plating in a side corridor. Jenkins vented cryogenic coolant through auxiliary ducts. Hayes rerouted a power fluctuation to kill overhead lights for 5 seconds at a time. Jenkins scattered loose metal, broken panels, and tools and angles where sound would bounce and confuse direction. Neither of them rushed. That was what made it so terrible. This was not desperation. This was method. Below, inside the reactor chamber, one mercenary lifted his scanner again and swallowed. "Commander," temperature drop across the upper vents. Then watch the upper vents. Another turned sharply. "Motion in corridor 5. They all aimed. Nothing but a second later, lights failed. Darkness swallowed the chamber. Someone fired too soon. Plasma lit the room in bright blue flashes and shadows. Then the emergency backup lights kicked in, not white, but deep red. Everything changed color. Every angle looked wrong. Every shadow looked alive. Then the fog came. Freezing white coolant mist spilled from overhead ducts and rolled down across catwalks, stairs, consoles, and the main reactor floor. In less than a minute, visibility dropped so badly that shapes disappeared at 5 meters. Optics glitched. Thermal readings blurred. One of the Valari started breathing too fast. Another turned in place, weapon shaking. Vox drew his plasma pistol and shouted into the fog, "Show yourselves." The answer was not a voice. IT was a whistle. Sharp, brief, impossible to place. That IT echoed off steel and vanished. Then came a second sound. Metal tapping on metal. Clack, pause, clack, clack. Every mercenary in the room turned toward it. Then it came from somewhere else. Clack. Closer this time. One of the troopers fired blind into the mist. Another followed. Then another. Blue plasma filled the air, hitting pipes, railings, wall plating, and empty space. The fog turned brighter for a second, then thicker as ruptured coolant lines burst open. A mercenary screamed. "I saw something." He had not, but now all of them believed they had. Above the chamber, crouched in shadow on a service catwalk, Jenkins waited with perfect stillness. Below, and to the left, hidden inside a subfloor trench, Hayes watched the firing pattern and counted breaths. The Valari were doing exactly what Arthur predicted. They were spending themselves, burning fear into their muscles, wasting control, breaking formation with every shot. Back in the assembly chamber, the delegates watched the blurred red-tinted feed like it was a horror film from another world. Various spoke without meaning to. "They are not fighting them." Arthur answered at once. "No, what are they doing?" Arthur's eyes never left the screen. "They're exhausting them." That made several delegates turn. Arthur took a breath and continued. "Early humans used pursuit hunting. They didn't always kill fast. They followed, pressured, drove the target into a fear state, made it run hot, made it burn strength. By the time the real strike came, the prey couldn't think straight." Various looked back at the screen where huge armed mercenaries now spun in red fog, firing at sounds and shadows. The idea landed all at once. The Valari were no longer the predators in that room. They were the animals being run down. In Sector 7, one mercenary broke. "I'm not dying in this fog," he screamed, and ran for the blast door, but he made it less than 10 paces. A dark shape dropped from the catwalk above. Jenkins landed on him hard enough to drive him face first into the floor. Something flashed in her hand. The trooper screamed once, then not again. By the time the others turned, she was already gone. Not fleeing. Vanishing. The scream hung in the chamber long after she disappeared. Vox backed closer to the reactor controls. "Hold your line," he roared, and no one listened well anymore, because now each Valari in that chamber understood one horrible truth. The humans were somewhere inside the fog. And the humans were not lost. They were. They were being hunted. That truth finally settled into the bones of every Valari still alive in Sector 7, not fighting, not holding ground, not winning a hard battle, being hunted. And the worst part was this: they could not see the hunters. The fog kept rolling through the reactor chamber in freezing white waves. Red emergency lights strobed across metal railings, coolant towers, and heavy armor. Every shadow looked wrong. Every sound seemed close, then far, then close again. Subcommander Vox tried to force control back into the room. "Stay in formation," he shouted. "Watch your sectors. No one breaks rank." But fear had already moved inside his people. You could hear it in their breathing. You could see it in the way their rifles shook. Predators used to causing panic were now trapped inside it themselves. Above them, hidden behind a maintenance lip near the ceiling, Captain Jenkins remained perfectly still. Below the chamber floor, inside a narrow cable trench, Sergeant Hayes crawled through dust, coolant frost, and hanging wires with 2 salvage plasma cells strapped across his back that he had stopped, thinking in terms of winning a straight fight. That was not the goal. The goal was collapse, that he reached the main power conduit running beneath the reactor defense ring and studied the housing through the grate. Directly above him stood 5 Valari shock troops packed shoulder to shoulder around the central control area. Heavy armor, heavy weapons, tight formation, that a strong defensive choice against soldiers, a terrible one against humans who understood systems. Hayes carefully set both plasma cells against the conduit casing and started wiring them together with strip cable pulled from the trench walls. He was not building a bomb in the usual sense. He was building a directed electrical failure, a surge, a burst of violence through machinery. Something that would not destroy the troops outright, but would ruin everything they depended on. On the catwalk, Jenkins waited. Then her wristcom gave one soft click. Hayes was ready. Down below, Vox stared into the shifting fog and tried to make sense of the tactical display strapped to his forearm. Too many dead, too many lost contact points, too much silence. "Where are they?" one mercenary whispered, and one answered him. Because no one knew. Jenkins moved first, not by attacking, but by making them look. She picked up a loose strip of metal from the catwalk and flicked it across the chamber. A T bounced off a coolant pipe to the far right. Clang. Every rifle in the room swung toward the sound. A second later, a whistle came from the opposite side. Sharp. Brief. Wrong. Half the ring turned again. That was all Hayes needed. He hit the trigger. The plasma cells ruptured under the floor in a violent upward burst of superheated electromagnetic force. It punched through the grated metal like a geyser of blue-white energy and slammed directly into the feet and lower armor systems of the 5 nearest Valari. Their suits did not explode. They locked. Servo systems fused at once. Weapon packs died. Targeting optics blinked out. 0.5 massive shock troops froze where they stood, suddenly prisoners inside their own armor. For 1 second, nobody in the room understood what had happened. Then panic broke fully. The defense ring shattered. Mercenaries stumbled backward, turning away from the sparking floor, shouting over each other, firing wild in a fog that hid nothing and everything at once. That was the moment Jenkins chose. She did not drop from above this time. She came straight through the fog at ground level, fast, silent, direct. A dark shape became a person only when she was already there. 1 brute-class mercenary swung his sidearm down toward her. Jenkins slid under the shot on the frost-slick floor, passed between his legs, and slashed the trench blade across the unarmored tendons behind both ankles. The alien screamed and crashed backward. Jenkins used his falling body as a ramp, planting one boot on his back and launching herself forward. The next mercenary barely brought his rifle around before she smashed the pommel of the blade into the front of his respirator mask. The reinforced plate shattered inward. He clawed at his face and dropped at a third try to grab her. She cut the inside seam of his elbow, twisted under his arm, and drove him straight into the dead weight of one of the frozen soldiers. Everything in the room had become confusion. Heavy armor that once made the Valari feel invincible now made them slow, loud, and trapped in each other's way. From the side fog, Sergeant Hayes emerged like blunt force made human. That he had emptied his captured rifle earlier, so now he used the weapon itself as a club. He swung the heavy frame into the jawline of a turning mercenary with enough force to spin the alien completely off balance. Bone cracked. The trooper hit the rail and dropped over it. Hayes did not stop, that he stepped in tight to the next one, grabbed the front of the armor harness, and drove his forehead into the visor with shocking violence. The glass webbed. A second hit broke it. Then Hayes shoved the mercenary back into the reactor support column and let him slide down. Vox watched it happen and felt the last of his confidence die. This was no longer a holdout and no longer a negotiation. His command structure had collapsed. His troops were not responding like soldiers anymore. They were reacting like cornered animals. He pulled his plasma pistol and backed toward the reactor's primary override console. If he could not escape, then he could still deny. Victory, he slammed one clawed hand onto the control panel and triggered the meltdown sequence. Once. A massive red warning klaxon began blaring across the chamber. Lights flashed. The reactor core brightened, but on the assembly chamber feed, delegates jerked upright in horror. Varius took a step toward Arthur's terminal. What did he do? Arthur's face went pale. He's trying to trigger a core overload. In the chamber itself, Ramirez straightened through obvious pain. Blood had dried dark across his collar. One arm hung stiffly at his side. "Can he do it?" he asked, and Arthur's fingers flew across the interface. "Maybe," he whispered. "Unless they cut the command line first." Back in Sector 7, Jenkins stopped moving. She stood 3 meters from Vox, mud, frost, blood, torn cloth. She looked less like an officer now and more like something the station itself had grown in the dark to kill intruders. Vox pointed the pistol at her with shaking hands. "I'll vaporize this whole sector," he screamed. "You won't leave with anything." Jenkins tilted her head slightly. For the first time since entering the chamber, she spoke. "Look at the console, Vox." Her voice was calm, too calm that Vox's eyes flicked downward. The klaxon was screaming, yes. The red warning sequence was active, yes. But the countdown itself was frozen in O progress, in O reactor rise. Nothing. His mouth slowly opened. Behind him, a shape stepped out of the fog. Hayes, still carrying the broken rifle frame, still breathing steady. "While you're shooting at shadows," he said, "I cut the core's primary data link from underneath." Vox stared at the dead controls, then back at Jenkins. "You're bluffing." "No," Jenkins said. "You were." Vox roared and fired the pistol. Nothing happened, just a dry click. Hayes tossed a scorched power cell onto the floor. It clattered across the steel grating and spun to a stop near Vox's feet. "EMP surge," Hayes said. "Fried every unshielded sidearm in the chamber." For one stunned second, Vox simply stood there, holding a dead weapon in a dead room with dead men around him. Then instinct took over that he dropped the pistol and lunged. Even injured and exhausted, he was still enormous. More than 100 pounds heavier than Jenkins, all muscle, claws, and armored rage. He swung with enough force to tear a lesser being apart. Jenkins did not retreat. She stepped inside the attack, caught the wrist, turned with his momentum, dropped her center of gravity, and threw him. The massive reptilian subcommander flipped hard over her shoulder and crashed onto the steel deck with bone-rattling force. Before he could recover, Jenkins dropped her knee onto his sternum and pinned him flat. The trench blade came to rest against the soft scales of his throat. Vox froze. Not because the blade was sharp, because he believed her. "Your people upstairs have 5 minutes," Jenkins said quietly. "They lay down their weapons, release every hostage, and stop resisting. Or I leave you alive, broken, and unable to scream when my people come back for you." Vox swallowed. The edge bit slightly into his throat as a thin line of blood appeared. "Do you understand?" He nodded. Jenkins tapped her wrist calm. "Ambassador Graham, this is Captain Jenkins. Sector 7 is secure. Reactor stable. Hostile command neutralized." In the assembly chamber, the message came through loud and clear over restored local systems. Relief did not hit the room all at once. IT moved through it like a wave that a few delegates sagged into their seats. Others looked around in disbelief, like they were waiting for someone to explain what kind of species humans really were. Arthur shut his eyes for 1 second and let out a breath he had been holding for far too long. Ramirez did not smile. "Not yet. Bring him up," he said into the comm. "We are not done." The remaining Valari in the chamber heard that too. Their reaction was immediate. The last of their confidence disappeared. Some looked at the unconscious Rex. Some looked at the doorway. Some looked at Ramirez, Jenkins' earlier warning still hanging in their minds, and seemed to understand that the injured diplomat leaning against the desk was somehow more dangerous than a room full of weapons. Then their comm units crackled. Vox's voice came through, shaking and wet with pain. "Stand down. All units stand down. Drop weapons. Repeat, drop weapons now." One of the mercenaries near the shattered doorway tried to protest. Then he saw Hayes first. The sergeant stepped into the chamber with the same steady walk he had entered the reactor level with. "No ruse. No swagger. Just purpose." Jenkins came behind him, one hand gripping Vox by the front of his harness, dragging the broken sub-commander forward while the trench blade rested lightly against his neck. They were both covered in frost and blood. Neither looked tired enough. That might have been the most disturbing part of all. The 6 remaining Valari guards lowered their weapons point one by one. Plasma rifles hit the floor. Then knees, then silence. High Counselor Various slowly stepped down from the podium again, unable to look anywhere but at the humans that he had spent years reading council reports about Earth's agricultural output, shipping models, population growth, education exports, linguistic integration, and diplomatic behavior. None of those reports had prepared him for this. The humans who had just broken the Valari command structure were not even Earth's frontline warfighters. These were diplomats, staff, in attache, in intern. And that realization opened a far more frightening question than the hostage crisis itself. If this was the soft face humanity showed the galaxy, what did the hard face look like? Ramirez pushed himself off the desk and straightened despite the obvious pain in his ribs. Arthur moved toward him at once with a salvaged medkit. "You should sit down," Arthur said. Ramirez gave him one brief look. Later, Arthur did not argue. Jenkins shoved Vox to his knees in the center of the rotunda. Hayes moved to secure the surrendered weapons into a pile. Delegates watched all of it without speaking, and O1 wanted to interrupt the humans while they were still deciding what happened next. Various finally found his voice. "Ambassador Graham," he said, carefully, "the station is secure. You have saved every life in this chamber." Ramirez adjusted the torn remains of his jacket with his good hand. "No," he said. "We stopped the first wave." Various blinked. "The first wave?" Ramirez looked at the broken warlord, then at Vox, then at the room. "The Valari do not do this on their own." The words shifted the mood instantly. Not relief now. Something colder, political fear. Arthur looked up from the medkit. "You think they were hired?" "I know they were." Ramirez turned slowly toward the Vesperan delegation desk. Several delegates followed his gaze. The Vesperans were a serpentine species known across the council for chemical refinement, advanced trade influence, and a habit of smiling politely while poisoning entire negotiations with terms no one noticed until too late. Their lead delegate, Sarlax, sat perfectly still. Too still that Ramirez's eyes narrowed. "The Valari are mercenaries," he said to the room. "They do not attack a full diplomatic summit, risk war with 40 member species, and seize a station this important unless someone pays them enough to make suicide look profitable." No one answered, and no one needed to. Because now the room was thinking the same thing. This had never been random. Ramirez took one slow step toward the Vesperan desk. Which means, he said, voice flat and controlled, someone inside this council opened the door for them. No one in the chamber moved. The fighting was over. The shooting had stopped. The Valari were disarmed, their leaders broken, their hostage plan shattered. And yet somehow, the room felt more dangerous than it had a minute earlier, because violence was simple. Politics was not. Ramirez stood in the center of the ruined rotunda, blood dried across his face. One hand burned black, his ribs cracked, his suit torn open at the side. But he looked steady, focused, very, very awake. His eyes stayed on the Vesperan delegation. Sarlacc, lead representative of the Vesperans, remained coiled at a station with the kind of careful stillness only guilty people ever manage. His scales reflected the emergency light in soft green patterns. His expression was controlled, too controlled. High Counselor Various looked from Ramirez to Sarlacc and back again. "Ambassador," he said carefully, "this is an extraordinary accusation." Ramirez did not look away from the Vesperan. So was the attack. The chamber remained silent. Even the alien delegates who moments earlier had been panicking now understood that something much bigger had been sitting beneath the surface of the entire summit. Arthur, still holding the medkit beside the Terran desk, pushed his broken glasses back into place and swallowed. "The shield failure," he said quietly. Ramirez gave a small nod. "Sequential collapse," he said. "Not explosive. Not random. Someone with internal access turned the perimeter grid off in layers. That requires codes. Real ones." Sarlacc finally moved. He lifted his head slowly and gave a soft hiss of contempt. "You are injured, human. Exhausted. Bleeding. That does not make you insightful. It makes you unstable." Ramirez almost smiled. "Almost. The Archon trade route," he said, speaking to the whole room now. "That was the point of attack. Not the station. Not the delegates. The treaty." Arthur took a step forward, the idea already forming in his head. The fear was still in him, but now it had a shape. He could think through a shape. Because if the treaty passed, Arthur said, Earth's shipping corridor would bypass the Vesperan monopoly on inner rim fuel. Several delegates turned sharply toward Sarlacc. Arthur kept going. "The Vesperans make trillions off controlled fuel movement through the inner systems. Earth's route would cut shipping costs, open the corridor, and destroy their pricing power." Ramirez finally looked at Arthur. "Exactly." Then his gaze returned to Sarlacc. "You could not openly block the treaty without exposing weakness. And you could not outvote us once the outer colonies accepted the concession structure. So you did what cowards do when trade fails." His voice hardened. "You hire monsters." Sarlacc uncoiled to his full height. "That is fiction." "No," Ramirez said. "That is motive." Jenkins stepped up beside him, her uniform ruined, trench blade still in hand, Vox kneeling at her feet like a broken animal. Hayes stood off to the side, arms steady, eyes moving, still covering angles nobody else in the chamber had remembered existed. Various turned toward the Vesperan desk, feathers tightening. "Delegate Sarlacc," he said, and for the first time there was no softness left in his tone. "Answer the charge." Sarlacc spread his hands slightly. "I'm a victim of this attack like everyone else in this room. Look around you. Look at the carnage. The humans want someone to blame for what they are." The words hung in the chamber. For a second, they almost worked, because the room had seen what humans were capable of now, and there was something in every delegate's mind asking the same question. What if the Vesperan was right? What if this was all just what humans became when pressure hit? Ramirez answered that doubt before it fully formed. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue emotionally. He simply turned to Vox. The kneeling Valari subcommander looked awful. Frost still clung to parts of his armor. Blood ran from the corner of his mouth. One side of his jaw was already swelling dark. Ramirez looked down at him. "You are currently deciding whether the rest of your life ends in a Terran prison site no one will ever find," he said, "or whether you help yourself by being useful for the first time today." Vox stared up at him. Ramirez's voice stayed calm. "Who gave you the shield codes?" Vox said nothing. Jenkins lowered the trench blade until it touched the side of his throat. Not enough to cut. Enough to remind. Hayes didn't even look over. He just spoke while still scanning the room. "If he lies, I'll know." That hit Vox harder than shouting would have that he looked once towards Sarlacc. That was all the chamber needed. Various saw it. Arthur saw it. Half the room saw it. Vox dropped his eyes. The Vesperin, he muttered. Sarlacc hissed sharply. Liar. Vox spat dark blood onto the floor. 3 million standard credits. Staged through shell account. Shield frequencies. Access windows. Route timings. All from a diplomatic relay tied to the Vesperin registry. The room exploded into noise. Not panic this time. Outrage. Delegates began talking over one another. Several stood. One demanded an immediate detention order. Another called for a full systems audit. A third began shouting for seizure of Vesperin assets before the translation field could even keep up. Silence. Various roared. The chamber obeyed. Sarlacc moved. Fast. Faster than most expected from a species. 1 second, he was at his desk. The next, he was lunging forward with his robes thrown aside and a compact ceramic sidearm in hand. Something meant to pass through standard scans and kill at close range that he did not even clear the weapon fully. Hayes moved first. He did not fire. He picked up the heavy durasteel wrench he had carried back from the lower decks and threw it in one clean motion. The wrench spun hard through the chamber and hit Sarlacc square in the chest. The impact sounded like a hammer hitting wet wood. The Vesperin flew backward, the pistol skidding across the stone as he collapsed into the side of his desk with the air driven completely from his body. Before he hit the ground fully, 2 armored Terran operators stormed through the side breach. That was the first moment most of the delegates noticed them. Because until then, everyone had been so focused on the chamber itself that they missed the silent arrival of something even more unsettling. Human reinforcements. Not diplomats. Not attaches. Not council-facing personnel. Operators in matte black armor with sealed visors and magnetically accelerated rifles, moving with such clean, synchronized discipline that even the remaining Valari prisoners visibly shrank from them. They crossed the floor in seconds, pinned Sarlacc down, secured the ceramic sidearm, and locked heavy restraints around his wrists and upper torso. Various stared. More figures entered behind them, just enough to take control of every doorway, every angle, every surrendering mercenary, and every political threat in the room. And oh panic, and oh noise, just perfect control. Ramirez glanced toward them, not surprised in the slightest. That told Various even more than their arrival did. You had backup, the High Counselor said quietly. Ramirez looked at him. We had contingencies. Arthur turned sharply. They were here the whole time? Ramirez adjusted the ruined front of his jacket with his good hand. In sensor shadow, he said. Standard diplomatic precaution. Various felt something cold move down his spine, because those words were delivered the same way a farmer might say, we brought an umbrella in case of rain. Standard precaution, a cloaked rapid response human force sitting invisible beside the station. Watching. Waiting. Prepared. He understood then, all at once, that Earth had never come to the stars naive. They had come smiling. That was different. Sarlacc groaned on the floor as the operators dragged him upright. His composure was gone now. So was the smooth arrogance. His scales had darkened with stress. Various stepped toward him. Delegate Sarlacc of the Vesperin block, he said, voice echoing through the chamber. You are hereby stripped of diplomatic protection pending immediate investigation into conspiracy, treason against the Council, and material coordination with a terrorist syndicate. Sarlacc tried to spit back some denial, but Payne stole most of IT, and no one cared. The room had already judged him. Ramirez turned away from the Vesperin and slowly took in the entire chamber. Broken stone, burst gardens, water still dripping from the ruined hydroponic lines, dead mercenaries, kneeling prisoners, terrified delegates, human operators locking the space down with total precision, and Arthur, still standing, still bloodied, still working. Ramirez walked back toward the Terran desk. Arthur stepped in, quickly, opening the medkit again. Sir, you really need treatment now. Ramirez gave a tired breath that almost became a laugh. Yes, he said. I probably do. Arthur began wrapping the burned hand more properly this time, and although Ramirez winced, he let him. Various approached more slowly. Not because he feared attack now, because he finally understood he was standing near something powerful enough to destroy the room and disciplined enough not to. That was worse. That was what real power looked like. He stopped in front of Ramirez and bowed his head. Not the polite diplomatic incline he had used 100 times before, a real bow. Deep, respectful, without calculation. Ambassador Graham, he said, voice stripped clean of every trace of earlier condescension. The Council owes Earth a debt that cannot be measured. Ramirez looked up at him. Various continued. We mistook your patience for weakness, your diplomacy for fear, your softness for fragility. We were blind. Ramirez held his gaze for a moment. Then he answered quietly. Our diplomacy was never weakness, Counselor. He looked past Various, toward the operators, Jenkins, Hayes, and the kneeling prisoners. It was restraint. Those words settled over the chamber more heavily than any threat could have, because everyone there had now seen what existed underneath that restraint. Various swallowed. The Archon trade route, he said. It will be ratified immediately. The concessions will stand. The Council will honor every clause. Ramirez gave a small nod. Good. Various hesitated, then asked the question he had been afraid to ask since the moment Arthur screamed. We're humans, really? The chamber went quiet again. Ramirez leaned back slightly against the ruined desk while Arthur finished securing the bandage around his hand. When he answered, his voice was calm. We are a species built on contradiction. Various said nothing. Ramirez continued. We can write poetry and build hospitals. We can negotiate peace for years without raising our voice. We can feed entire worlds, settle trade disputes, and spend months arguing over decimal points in tax policy. He glanced down at his bandaged hand. But we were born on a world where survival was never free. For most of our history, if something threatened our people, we met it with everything we had. His eyes lifted again. We spent thousands of years trying to become better than our worst instincts. That is what our diplomacy is. Not a mask, a choice. Then his expression hardened just slightly. But when someone threatens our pack, the old machinery is still there. Across the chamber, Jenkins finally allowed herself to stand at ease. Hayes lowered his rifle a few degrees. The black-armored operators maintained their silent perimeter. Ramirez spoke one last time, and now only Various was close enough to hear the full weight of it. We put a leash on what we are, he said. For everyone's safety. Various bowed his head again, understood, and for the first time in the history of the Pan-Galactic Council, that word carried true fear with it. The attack on Station Onyx changed the galaxy overnight. The story spread first through diplomatic channels, then trade routes, then military rumor networks, then the outer colonies where fear moved faster than official news ever could. Humanity was no longer seen as a polite agrarian newcomer with useful logistics, artistic culture, and impressive negotiation habits. Now, the galaxy understood the full shape of the truth. Humans were cooperative, yes. Civilized, yes. Patient, yes. Diplomatic, yes. But underneath all of that lived something ancient, a species from a death world, a species that could endure pain, coordinate instantly, adapt faster than expected, and turn fear itself into a weapon. The Archon trade route was ratified in full. The Vesperan monopoly broke within the year. The Valari syndicate fractured soon after, its surviving captains refusing any contract that involved Terran. Space, Terran cargo, or Terran personnel. Earth did not conquer the galaxy through invasion. IT did something far more effective. IT showed the galaxy exactly what sat behind the smile. And after that, most species became very eager to keep humanity smiling. Because on Station Onyx, in one terrible day of blood, steel, and broken illusion, the galaxy learned the truth it should have understood from the start. Humans were not prey pretending to be civilized. Humans were predators choosing to be kind. And that choice, more than any fleet or weapon ever built, became the most powerful force in known space.